The storm came without warning. My cabin was meant to be a place of solitude, quiet, hidden, untouched. But that night, silence shattered with a knock at my door. Standing there was an Amish boy, soaked to the skin, eyes wide and trembling with secrets he couldn't speak. He was forbidden, from a world not my own. Yet the way he looked at me, it felt like he'd been searching for this moment his whole life. And when I let him inside, everything I thought I knew about love, about rules, about myself, changed forever. The storm began as a whisper in the trees. I had been in the cabin for 3 days straight, tucked away from the world the way I liked it, firewood stacked high, kettle whistling on the stove, the patter of rain on the tin roof like a lullaby only the wilderness could compose. Nights like these were supposed to be safe, predictable. Just me, my books, and the comfort of knowing no one could find me here. But fate has a way of breaking the rules we write for ourselves. It was near midnight when the knock came. A single, sharp sound against the wooden door. I froze, the cup of tea trembling in my hand. No one was supposed to know about this place. No one ever came here. The knock came again, softer this time, like the hand on the other side was unsure if it even belonged. Heart hammering, I set the cup down and crossed the creaky floorboards. For a long breath, I just stood there, my palm hovering over the latch, wondering if this was madness, if I should ignore it, let the storm swallow whoever stood outside. But something pulled me. A quiet instinct. When I finally unlatched the door, the world shifted. He stood there. Soaked to the bone, rain dripping from the brim of his wide hat, dark curls plastered against his pale forehead. His clothes were plain, suspenders, rough linen shirt, boots muddied from miles of walking, but it was his eyes that rooted me to the spot. Gray, searching, silent. Like he'd been lost for years and had just now stumbled upon something he didn't know he needed. He didn't speak. Not a word. For a moment, we only stared at each other, the storm raging behind him, my warm cabin glowing faintly behind me. The contrast was too much. He was a painting half erased by rain, stepping into a world he did not belong to. Finally, I whispered, "You're drenched. Come inside." He hesitated, his lips parting as if to answer, then pressing shut again. But he stepped forward, his boots leaving wet imprints on the wood, the air shifting as I closed the door behind him. Up close, the details sharpened. His hands trembled faintly, not from cold alone but from something deeper, fear, maybe. His silence wasn't empty, it was heavy, as though he carried entire sentences he wasn't allowed to speak. "Sit," I urged, gesturing toward the chair near the fire. He obeyed quietly, lowering himself like a man unused to comfort. Steam rose from the kettle. I poured a mug and held it out to him. Our fingers brushed as he took it, and even that fleeting touch carried a jolt I couldn't explain. His skin was rough, calloused from work, but warm. Alive. I studied him carefully, trying to piece together the mystery. I'd seen Amish men before, passing in town, always in groups, always purposeful. But never like this. Never alone, in the middle of the night, with eyes that begged without words. "What's your name?" I asked gently. He didn't answer. Just stared into the fire, lips pressed tight. I tried again. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to know who you are." Nothing. But when I reached for the blanket draped over the armchair and wrapped it around his shoulders, I felt him exhale. A tiny surrender, as if in that moment, warmth mattered more than silence. We sat like that for a while, the storm rattling the windows, thunder rumbling like an angry god. I wanted to speak, to break the silence with questions. "Why are you here? What are you running from?" But something about him told me words weren't ready yet. Instead, I watched the way his shoulders slowly lowered, the way his eyes softened in the firelight. There was something fragile about him, as if he'd been holding himself together too tightly for too long. And then it hit me. This boy, this stranger, wasn't just lost in the storm outside. He was lost in himself. When I finally rose to check the windows, he followed me with his gaze. I felt it, a weight at my back, burning hotter than the fire. When I turned, our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, neither of us looked away. It was a look that asked questions. A look that carried danger. A look that said I shouldn't be here but also I can't leave. I broke first, glancing away, my pulse too loud in my ears. "You should rest," I said softly. "The couch is yours for tonight." He didn't argue. Didn't nod. Just stood when I pointed him toward it, still wrapped in the blanket, his wet clothes leaving small puddles on the wood. As he lay down, turning his face toward the wall, I caught the faintest trace of something, relief, maybe. Trust, however fragile. I returned to my chair, pretending to read while the storm carried on. But my eyes strayed to him, again and again. To the quiet rise and fall of his chest, the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck, the shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes. And somewhere deep inside, a thought I shouldn't have dared: why does his presence feel like it belongs here, in my cabin, in my life? The storm began to ease near dawn. The thunder faded to a whisper, the rain softening to a gentle patter. But sleep never came for me. Because across the room, under my blanket, lay a boy from another world. Silent. Forbidden. Unexplainably here. And with every stolen glance, every unspoken question, one truth became harder to deny. The storm hadn't brought him to my door by accident. It had brought him to me. The morning came softly, like the world itself was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. Not really. Every time my eyes closed, I'd hear the creak of the couch, the rhythm of his breathing, the faint shift of fabric as he moved beneath the blanket. I told myself I was being protective, listening in case he needed something. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was afraid of missing even a second of his presence. When the sun finally broke through the gray clouds, spilling pale gold across the wooden floor, I rose quietly and moved toward the stove. The boy still lay on his side, face turned toward the wall, curls catching the light. He looked impossibly young in that moment, his features soft, almost peaceful. I busied myself with coffee, eggs, and bread, the cabin filling with the kind of warmth that always reminded me of home. But when I turned, plate in hand, I found him awake, sitting up, blanket draped around his shoulders, eyes fixed on me. I froze, a flush creeping up my neck. "Hungry?" I asked. He didn't answer. But his gaze flicked from the plate to my face, and something in it, hesitation, maybe gratitude, told me yes. I set the plate down on the table and gestured for him to sit. He did, cautiously, like every step was a test of whether he belonged. We ate in silence. Or rather, I ate, and he nibbled, slow, deliberate, as if every bite was unfamiliar. He handled the fork awkwardly, like it wasn't his usual way of eating, and I realized, of course. He probably wasn't used to this kind of food, this kind of setting. I tried to act casual. "You must have walked far, in that storm. Were you, on your way somewhere?" His eyes flicked up to mine. For a moment, I thought he might finally speak. But instead, he lowered them again, chewing quietly, his silence more eloquent than words. Something in me ached. The weight he carried was too visible, too heavy. So I softened my voice. "It's okay. You don't have to talk. Not yet." His shoulders shifted, just barely, like a breath he'd been holding was released. After breakfast, I stepped outside to check the woodpile. The world was freshly washed, the storm having left every leaf glistening, every scent sharp with pine and earth. When I turned back toward the cabin, I saw him through the window, standing near my bookshelf, fingertips tracing the worn spines as though they were treasures. The sight stopped me. There was something almost reverent in the way he touched the books, like each one was a secret he longed to open but dared not. And for the first time, I realized, he wasn't just silent. He was curious. Hungry. Starved for something he couldn't name. I stepped inside quietly. He pulled his hand back, guilt flickering across his face, as if he'd been caught doing something forbidden. "It's okay," I said gently. "You can look. They're just books." He hesitated, then reached again, brushing his fingers over the cover of a poetry collection. He didn't open it, but he held it with both hands, as if the weight of words mattered even without reading them. "Do you?" I started, then stopped. How could I ask if he could read? If he'd ever been allowed? The thought made my chest tighten. Instead, I offered a small smile. "They're here for you, if you want them." For a fleeting moment, his eyes lifted to mine, and there was something in them. "Thank you, maybe." It was the first time I felt his silence wasn't a wall, but a language of its own. The hours stretched. I chopped wood, fixed the leak in the porch roof, swept out the ashes. He followed quietly, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching, his presence constant but unobtrusive. When I struggled with the heavier logs, he stepped forward, wordless, taking the weight with ease. His strength surprised me, his rough hand steady, practiced. "Thank you," I murmured, catching my breath. He only nodded, but the faintest curve touched his lips, a ghost of a smile that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. That small flicker, it stayed with me longer than it should have. By afternoon, the rain returned, not the furious storm of last night, but a gentle drizzle. We sat inside, the fire crackling low, the quiet thick but not uncomfortable. I found myself wanting to fill it, to draw something from him. So I asked softly, "Do you have family? Are they worried about you?" His eyes darkened, shifting away. The muscles in his jaw tightened. That silence was different, painful, guarded. I reached out instinctively, laying a hand on his arm. His skin was warm beneath the rough linen, and at my touch, he froze. For a heartbeat, I thought he might pull away. But then, slowly, his shoulders lowered, and he let me keep my hand there. The air between us shifted. It wasn't about the question anymore. It was about contact. About the way our bodies seemed to speak a language our voices could not. My heart thudded painfully, and I withdrew, afraid of crossing a line. But I couldn't ignore the way his eyes lingered where my hand had been, as though memorizing the warmth. Evening fell again, painting the cabin in amber firelight. He hadn't spoken a single word all day, yet I felt like I knew him more intimately than most people I'd known for years. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was charged. Alive. As I set out another blanket for him on the couch, he hesitated, standing in the middle of the room, eyes on me like he wanted to say something. His lips parted, then closed again, frustration flickering across his face. I crossed the space between us, lowering my voice. You don't have to force it. I hear you. Even without words. His throat bobbed. His fists clenched at his sides. And then, to my surprise, he nodded, just once, but firm, like a vow. Something inside me unraveled. Because in that moment, I understood, whatever had brought him here, whatever he carried in silence, he was choosing to stay. At least for now. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. That night, as the rain whispered against the cabin roof, I lay awake again. The distance between the couch and my bed felt like an ocean, but I could feel him, his breathing, steady, his presence filling every corner of the small space. I turned toward the ceiling, heart restless, and wondered how long this fragile, forbidden closeness could last before the storm inside us both demanded to be named. The second night was quieter. The storm had softened into a misty drizzle, the kind that lingered without fury, just enough to blur the windows and dampen the air. Inside, the cabin glowed with the warmth of the fire, the scent of wood smoke weaving through every corner. He sat on the couch again, blanket pulled over his shoulders, curls drying into soft waves that brushed his temples. I pretended to read, though the truth was I hadn't turned a page in an hour. My eyes kept drifting back to him. The way his fingers traced the stitching of the blanket. The way his gaze followed the flames like he was searching for answers in their dance. The way silence clung to him, not as emptiness, but as armor. Finally, I broke it. You must have a name, I said softly, testing the waters again. His eyes lifted, gray and cautious, holding mine for a beat before lowering once more. He didn't speak, of course. But the faintest twitch of his lips came, like the ghost of a smile, or maybe a challenge. I sighed, leaning back. Fine. If you won't tell me, I'll give you one. That earned the tiniest tilt of his head. Eli, I said after a pause, tasting the word on my tongue. You look like an Eli. For the first time since he'd arrived, his eyes warmed. Not quite a smile. But not nothing. I laughed softly. Eli it is, then. Later, when the fire began to dim, I gathered the courage to ask the question gnawing at me. Will you stay another night? His head turned, eyes searching mine. He hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Relief washed through me, though I tried to hide it. Good. Well, it's safer. The roads are muddy still. Best not to travel. But we both knew it wasn't just about safety. It was about choice. That night, I lay awake again, the ceiling looming above me like a restless canvas. The sound of his breathing reached me across the room, steady, grounding, and somehow unbearable. I rolled onto my side, eyes straying to where he slept on the couch. His face was half lit by the fire's last glow, lashes casting shadows on his cheeks. The blanket had slipped, exposing the curve of his shoulder, the rise and fall of his chest beneath the rough shirt. Something dangerous stirred inside me. I shouldn't have looked. I shouldn't have wanted. He was a stranger, forbidden, a boy from a world bound in rules I didn't understand. And yet, I remembered the way his eyes had softened when I called him Eli. The way his hand hadn't pulled away when I touched his arm. The way his silence seemed less like distance and more like a secret waiting to be shared. I turned away, heart pounding, ashamed of the heat in my chest. But the truth burned brighter than the fire. I wanted him here. Not just in the cabin. But close. Too close. Morning came slow and gray. The rain had stopped, leaving the forest dripping quietly. I found him already awake, sitting at the table, turning one of my books in his hands. He didn't open it, just studied the cover like it held a secret. When he saw me, he startled slightly, as though caught doing something forbidden again. It's okay, I said gently. Really. You can look at anything you want here. He glanced back at the book, then at me, and for a moment, it felt like he wanted to say something, like words were pressing against his lips. But they never came. Instead, he placed the book down carefully, almost reverently, and stood. The day passed with small rituals. We chopped wood together. He carried logs easily, his strength quiet but undeniable. When our hands brushed in passing, neither of us pulled away too quickly. When he caught me watching him, he didn't look down immediately this time. It was subtle. Barely there. But it was enough to make my chest ache. At one point, I offered him another name for connection. You don't have to speak, I said, handing him a pencil and paper. Maybe you could write? He froze, staring at the page like it was a test he wasn't ready to take. His lips pressed thin. Slowly, he shook his head. Something about the refusal wasn't stubborn, it was wounded. Like the very idea of expression had been taken from him long ago. I didn't push. I just folded the paper back, placing it aside. That's okay. We'll figure out our own way to talk. His eyes flickered, and that faint almost smile appeared again. That evening, the cabin felt smaller. The air thicker. He sat closer to the fire this time, closer to me. Our knees nearly brushed when I lowered into the chair. I felt the warmth of him, not just the fire, but him, seeping through the inches between us. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. Why here? I asked quietly, my eyes on the flames. Why me? Out of all the places you could have gone. He didn't answer. But when I finally looked at him, his gaze was steady on me, unflinching, unreadable. The truth hit me then, even without words, he didn't end up here by accident. Something had drawn him. And whatever it was the same thing pulling me toward him now, breath by breath. That night, when I set the blanket out again, he hesitated once more. Stood there, still as stone, watching me. The fire cast his face in shadows, his eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing mine as he took the blanket. Just a touch, deliberate this time. It was brief. Barely a second. But it unraveled me. I looked up, and for the first time, I swore I saw the truth flicker in his eyes. Desire. Fear. Longing. All tangled together, as forbidden as the storm that had carried him here. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved closer. But when he finally lay down, turning toward the wall again, I could still feel the ghost of his touch burning against my skin. And in that silence, I realized, we were no longer strangers. We were something far more dangerous. The third morning dawned with a fragile light. Mist hung low over the trees, curling like breath over the pines. Inside the cabin, it felt different, charged, restless, as if the air itself had begun to sense what neither of us dared speak. Eli moved around quietly, the same way he always did, each step careful, precise. He carried logs in from the stack outside, the dampness clinging to his sleeves. I watched from the table, coffee cooling in my hands, wondering how someone could exist so silently and yet take up so much space inside me. Every movement drew my attention. The way his shoulders flexed under the fabric of his shirt. The way his curls stuck to his forehead with rain. The way he never asked, but simply was. And the longer he stayed, the more unbearable it became. That afternoon, I caught myself staring again. He was kneeling by the fire, coaxing it back to life with a skill I didn't have. Sparks leapt under his hands, smoke curling around his face. Eli, the name slipped out before I could stop it. He turned, eyes lifting to mine. Gray, steady, questioning. My throat tightened. I wanted to ask what he was thinking. I wanted to ask why he hadn't left yet. I wanted to ask if he felt the same pull I did every time the air between us grew too thick. But the words dissolved. Instead, I stood abruptly, muttering something about needing more water, and pushed out into the drizzle. The stream ran just beyond the trees, its surface swollen from days of rain. I filled the bucket, the cold biting my fingers, and tried to shake the thoughts away. This was insane. He was Amish. I was everything they were taught to fear. I knew the stories, the rules, the punishment for stepping outside their world. And still, I couldn't stop the way my heart beat faster every time his eyes found mine. When I returned, Eli was waiting by the door. His hand brushed mine as he took the bucket. Deliberate. Not accident. The touch burned through me. I almost said something then, almost confessed the storm inside me. But his gaze darted away, and the moment passed. That evening, as the rain whispered against the roof, I offered him another blanket. He hesitated, then shook his head, placing it gently back in my arms. His eyes lingered on mine, searching, as if to say I don't need this, not if you're here. I froze, pulse hammering, every nerve alive. Eli, my voice was barely a whisper. But he only turned, settling into the couch, his back to me. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, the silence louder than thunder, every creak of the cabin magnified. His breathing was steady across the room, but I felt it against my skin, sinking with mine, taunting me. Finally, I couldn't take it. I sat up, the floor cold beneath my feet, and crossed the small space between us. He stirred when I stopped beside the couch. His eyes opened, dark in the flickering firelight. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, cautiously, I reached down, brushing the hair from his forehead. My fingers trembled, but I couldn't pull back. He didn't flinch. Didn't turn away. His breath caught, chest rising, eyes never leaving mine. The world seemed to stop. And then, deliberately, he reached up, catching my wrist. The touch was firm. Hot. Alive. We stayed like that, suspended in the silence, bound by something stronger than words. I thought he might pull me closer. I thought I might lean down, erase the inches between us. but instead, he released me. Slowly. Carefully. His eyes shuttered, lashes lowering as if he was closing a door. I stepped back, breath unsteady, shame and longing colliding in my chest. The next day, the air between us was heavier. Everything the same, yet everything different. He moved around me in silence, but his glances lingered a fraction too long. My hands brushed his more often than chance would allow. The space in the cabin felt smaller, as though it had shrunk to force us together. And yet, we both held back. It wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about risk. About the world he carried on his shoulders, the one that would condemn him for even being here. At one point, I asked, "Do you ever think about leaving? About a life outside?" He froze, the axe still in his hands. For a moment, I thought he might answer. But then his shoulders stiffened, and he buried the blade into the wood with a force that said everything words could not. I didn't ask again. That night, I dreamed of him. Of his hand reaching for mine. Of his lips, parted but silent. Of the weight of him against me. When I woke, sweat slick on my skin, the fire low and crackling, he was already watching me. Our eyes met across the room. And in that look, I felt it, the same hunger, the same war. But before I could move, before I could speak, he turned away. Days blurred. The storm passed, but he stayed. Each sunrise carried the same question: would today be the day he left? Would today be the day the silence broke? The pull between us grew unbearable. Every brush of his hand was electric. Every shared glance a confession. Every night, the space between the couch and my bed felt smaller, until it was only air, thin and fragile. Something had to give. And deep down, I knew, the moment it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The rain finally ended, leaving the forest washed clean, every leaf dripping with silver light. For the first time since he'd arrived, the cabin was bright. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the wooden floor with gold. And still, Eli stayed. Every morning I woke with the same thought: he'll be gone today. But each time I stepped into the main room, there he was, quiet, steady, folding blankets, bringing in wood, moving through my space as though it had always belonged to him. I didn't ask why. I didn't dare. Because the truth was selfish, I didn't want him to leave. But the longer he stayed, the more the silence pressed on me like a weight. One afternoon, I found him standing at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed on the dirt road that led deeper into the valley. He stood perfectly still, like a shadow carved against the trees. I joined him, careful, leaving just enough space between us. "Thinking about home?" I asked softly. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. I followed his gaze down the road, the way it disappeared into the horizon. For him, that road meant family, rules, sermons, fields. For me, it meant freedom. The difference between us stretched wider than the clearing itself. "You don't have to go back, you know," I said before I could stop myself. His head turned sharply, eyes flashing. For the first time, his silence felt sharp, like a blade. Then, without a word, he walked back toward the cabin. I stayed behind, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. That night, he built the fire with a force I hadn't seen before, each strike of the poker sparking embers like fragments of anger. I wanted to apologize, to take back what I'd said. But before I could, he looked at me, really looked. His eyes were storm gray, dark and conflicted. And in them, I saw it, the war. Not just against me. Against himself. Against everything he'd been taught. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled. So I crossed the room slowly, my heart pounding, until I stood just a breath away. "Eli," I whispered, voice trembling. His chest rose, fell, rose again. Then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned closer. The air between us thinned. My hand twitched, wanting to close the last inch. But then, suddenly, he pulled back. His chair scraped against the floor as he turned sharply, putting the fire between us. My chest ached, but I didn't follow. I just sat down, swallowing the hollow inside me. The next morning was worse. He avoided my gaze, moving around the cabin with brisk efficiency. When I tried to help stack the wood, he shook his head, taking the axe from me with a firmness that left no room for argument. At one point, he slipped outside alone. Hours passed before he returned, his hair damp with sweat, his shirt clinging to his back. I wanted to ask where he'd gone, but the look on his face stopped me. He was retreating, brick by brick, building walls where there had been none. And it terrified me. That evening, I couldn't take it anymore. "Talk to me," I whispered across the firelight. "Or, don't. But something. Please." His hands froze over the blanket he was folding. His shoulders stiffened. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, meeting mine across the small room. And then, to my shock, he shook his head, fierce, pained. His lips parted, like he wanted to speak, but no sound came. Instead, his hand slammed flat against his chest. Once. Hard. The sound cracked through the silence. I understood. It's not that he won't. It's that he can't. Emotion tightened my throat. I wanted to cross the room, to hold him, to say all the words he couldn't. But I stayed still, afraid that one wrong move would shatter him completely. He lowered his hand slowly, eyes locked on mine, heavy with something I couldn't name. Then he turned away, shoulders shaking just enough to betray him. I'd seen strong men break before. But never like that. Never so silently. The next day, the world intruded. We heard the sound together, a wagon rattling faintly down the road. My pulse spiked. Eli froze, dropping the log he carried. His head whipped toward the sound, his whole body taut with fear. I opened my mouth to reassure him, but he was already moving, slipping into the shadows of the cabin, pressing himself against the wall, out of sight from the windows. Eli, I whispered urgently. It's fine. They won't stop here. They don't even know. But his eyes were wild, wide with panic. He shook his head violently, pressing a finger to his lips, begging me to stay silent. I obeyed. The wagon rolled past, voices faint and distant. But long after the sound disappeared, Eli stayed hidden, his chest heaving, his eyes shut tight. When he finally emerged, his face was pale, jaw clenched. That was when I realized, this wasn't just about desire. It was about survival. If anyone knew he was here, like this, it could destroy him. That night, he didn't take the couch. Instead, he sat by the fire until it burned to embers, staring into it as though it held answers he couldn't find. I lay awake, watching him, wishing I could take the weight from his shoulders. At some point, exhaustion claimed me. When I stirred in the early gray hours, I felt something different. The couch was empty. I sat up, heart racing, only to see him standing by the door, hand resting on the handle. Eli? My voice cracked the silence. He turned, eyes meeting mine. For a moment, everything in his face was laid bare, fear, longing, regret. Then, slowly, he stepped away from the door and returned to the couch. No words. No explanations. But I knew what it meant. He wanted to leave. He couldn't. And maybe, he didn't want to. The days had blurred into each other, each one heavy with the same unbearable rhythm, chores, fire, silence, glances that lingered too long. Eli hadn't left. I hadn't asked him to. But the longer he stayed, the harder it became to breathe. Every brush of his shoulder against mine felt like a spark against tinder. Every time our eyes met, the world around us seemed to fall away. And every night, I lay awake, wondering how much longer either of us could pretend. One evening, I found him outside, splitting wood in the fading light. His shirt clung to him, damp with sweat, muscles taut under the fabric as he lifted and brought the axe down clean. I leaned in the doorway, watching, unable to tear my eyes away. When he finally noticed me, he paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Our gazes caught and held. Something passed between us then, unspoken, undeniable. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. He didn't move. The axe slid from his hand, landing softly in the grass. For a moment, we just stood there, the air charged, the forest holding its breath. Then, without a word, I reached for the log he'd just split, setting it on the stack beside his. Our hands brushed. Not accident. Not this time. And still, he didn't pull away. That night, the silence was unbearable. The firelight flickered, throwing shadows across his face, highlighting the curve of his jaw, the soft fall of his hair. I sat across from him, pretending to read, but the words blurred uselessly. Finally, I dropped the book, the sound sharp in the stillness. Eli, I said, voice low, raw. I can't keep pretending. His eyes lifted, steady and unflinching. I know you can't say it, I whispered. But I feel it. Every time you look at me. Every time you stay instead of leaving. Every time you, my voice broke. Tell me I'm not imagining it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, slowly, he rose. Crossing the space between us, he stopped just inches away. His hand lifted, trembling, before falling gently on my chest. Right over my heart. The contact was light, almost reverent. But it broke me open. I covered his hand with mine, holding it there, pressing it harder against me so he could feel what his silence already knew, my heart pounding, wild and desperate. He closed his eyes, his lips parting as though words might escape. But none came. Instead, he leaned forward, his forehead resting against mine. I froze, breath shuddering, the heat of him filling every corner of me. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But we didn't need to. That moment was already more intimate than anything I'd ever known. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet, shining in the firelight. I wanted to say something, anything, but he shook his head, sharp, almost pleading. His hand slipped from mine, and he turned away, shoulders tight. The distance between us grew again, unbearable in its absence. The next morning, I woke to find him gone. Panic surged as I bolted from the bed, searching the cabin. Empty. My chest clenched, fear clawing at me. I ran outside, scanning the clearing, only to spot him by the stream, kneeling, splashing water over his face as if trying to wash something away. Relief hit me hard, but it was chased by something else, the sharp ache of knowing he was fighting us. Fighting himself. When he noticed me, his expression hardened. He rose quickly, brushing past me without a glance, disappearing into the cabin. The wall was back. Higher than ever. Later, while chopping vegetables for supper, I spoke without looking up. "You're afraid," I said quietly. He stilled. "You're afraid of what this means. Of what they'd say. Of what you feel." My hands shook as I set the knife down. "I'm afraid too, Eli. But not of you." The silence stretched, unbearable. I finally lifted my eyes, only to find him staring at me, face pale, lips parted. For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually answer. Instead, he turned abruptly, storming outside into the dusk. I followed. He was standing at the edge of the clearing again, staring down the road, his body rigid with tension. "Do you want to leave?" I asked, breathless. "If you do, tell me. I won't stop you. But don't keep staying if you don't want this." His fists clenched at his sides. His chest rose and fell, sharp and uneven. Finally, he spun toward me. His eyes blazed, raw and desperate. Before I could process, he grabbed my arm, hard, pulling me close. His breath hitched, lips just inches from mine, his body trembling against me. For one suspended second, the world fell away. It should have been a kiss. It almost was. But at the last moment, he pushed me back, releasing me as though burned. His face twisted, pain, longing, shame, all tangled together. And then he turned, storming into the cabin, leaving me in the clearing with my heart pounding out of control. That night, the fire burned low, but neither of us slept. He lay on the couch, facing the wall, body rigid. I sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. The silence between us was no longer soft. It was sharp, dangerous. We had crossed a line. And there was no going back. The storm had ended days ago, yet inside the cabin, it still raged. Eli moved like a shadow now, careful but restless, his silence sharper than it had ever been. Every glance he threw me was fire and ice, wanting and denying in the same breath. And me? I was unraveling. Every brush of his hand, every moment his eyes lingered on mine, every night I lay awake listening to his breathing, I couldn't take it anymore. The air between us had become unbearable, heavy with everything unsaid. Something had to break. It happened one evening, just as the sun sank low, painting the forest in streaks of gold and fire. I found him outside, stacking the last of the wood. His movements were hard, sharp, like each strike was a punishment. His jaw was tight, his curls damp with sweat. "Eli," I called, my voice rougher than I intended. He froze. Didn't turn. I stepped closer, heart pounding. "We can't keep doing this." His shoulders stiffened. Slowly, he lowered the log in his hands, setting it onto the pile with too much care. Then he turned. And when his eyes met mine, I nearly staggered. They burned. Not with anger. Not with hate. But with everything he had fought to hide since the night he arrived. Desire. Fear. Longing. It was all there, naked and raw. I closed the distance without thinking, until we were just inches apart. "Tell me to stop," I whispered, my breath catching. "If you don't want this, if you don't want me, just say it, Eli." His lips parted, trembling, but no sound came. His fists clenched at his sides. And then, he reached for me. His hand fisted in the front of my shirt, pulling me closer, slamming me against him with a force that stole my breath. His eyes blazed, desperate, and for one wild heartbeat, I thought he'd finally let go. I leaned in, lips parting. But he twisted, shoving me back with equal force. "No." The word was broken, hoarse, but it was there, his first word. His voice cracked like thunder in the silence, rough and unsteady, but real. My chest seized. I stared, stunned, the echo of that single syllable rattling in my bones. He was trembling, his entire body shaking. His lips moved again, as if trying to form more words, but nothing came. "Eli," I breathed, my heart breaking. He shook his head violently, hands tangling in his hair. The sound he made was somewhere between a sob and a growl, raw with frustration. I reached for him, but he flinched back, eyes wet, chest heaving. "I'm here," I whispered desperately. "It's okay. You don't have to fight me. You don't have to fight this." His eyes locked on mine, wild and tormented. Then, with a strangled sound, he lunged forward, closing the space between us, his mouth crushing against mine. The world stopped. His lips were rough, clumsy, trembling, but real. His hands gripped my shoulders like he was drowning, like I was the only thing holding him above water. I kissed him back, helpless, my entire body igniting. Years of silence, of rules, of fear poured out of him into that moment, into me. It wasn't soft. It wasn't patient. It was desperate, hungry, broken. When he finally tore away, his chest was heaving, his eyes wide and terrified. I lifted a hand, cupping his face gently. "It's okay," I whispered, my own breath ragged. "You don't have to be afraid with me." His jaw trembled beneath my palm. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch like he'd never been touched before. That night, the cabin was different. He didn't take the couch. Instead, he sat on the edge of my bed, hesitant, shaking, but unwilling to step away. I shifted, giving him space, my heart pounding so loud it filled the silence. Slowly, cautiously, I reached for his hand. He didn't pull back. His fingers laced with mine, tentative but deliberate. We sat like that for what felt like hours, hands locked, shoulders brushing, neither of us speaking. At one point, he lifted our joined hands, pressing them against his chest. His heart thundered under my palm, wild and unsteady. He opened his mouth again, lips shaping a word that never came. But I didn't need to hear it. I already knew. But even as warmth filled me, fear clawed at the edges. Because what we had just crossed into wasn't just forbidden, it was dangerous. If anyone knew, if anyone from his world found out, there would be no forgiveness. No second chance. And as his head lowered to rest against my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck, I realized something terrifying. We had stepped into fire. And neither of us wanted to turn back. The kiss should have ruined everything. Instead, it ruined nothing. The next morning, Eli was still there, still beside me, his hand tangled with mine, his breath steady against my shoulder. The fire had burned low in the hearth, but I felt warmer than I had in years. When the sunlight reached his face, I watched it like a sin. His lashes soft against his cheek, the faintest shadow of stubble along his jaw. He was beautiful in a way I didn't dare describe aloud. But beauty in secret always comes with a cost. I was chopping wood outside when I first heard it, the distant rattle of a horse's hooves. My hands froze around the axe. Eli was inside, tending the fire. He didn't hear it yet. The sound grew closer. A wagon creaking. Voices muffled. My pulse spiked. When I turned, Eli was standing in the doorway, pale as snow. He'd heard it now. His eyes were wide, his lips parted like a prayer caught in his throat. I didn't need words to understand. "They're looking for you," I whispered. He nodded once, sharp and terrified. I grabbed his hand, pulling him back inside, shutting the door. My mind raced. What would they say if they found him here? What would they do if they knew what had passed between us? Eli moved to the window, peering through a sliver of curtain. His whole body trembled. His lips formed a single word I couldn't hear, but I read it clear: "Father." His father. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't just a search. This was a man hunting down the son who had slipped away. The knock came hard, rattling the cabin walls. I stepped forward before Eli could move. "Stay behind me," I hissed. Another knock, louder. A voice, deep, commanding. "Have you seen a boy? My son." I swallowed, heart thundering. "No one's here but me." A pause. Then the sound of boots crunching against the wood porch. The door shook as a heavy hand tested it. I held my breath, silently praying the latch would hold. Eli pressed into my back, his fists gripping the fabric of my shirt. His trembling bled into me, making it impossible to stay steady. The silence stretched. Then, hoofbeats again. Fading. Moving away. We didn't breathe until the sound was gone. When I finally turned, Eli's face was streaked with tears. He broke. His fists hit my chest, weak, frantic. Then he collapsed against me, sobbing without sound. I held him tight, arms wrapping around his shuddering body, my own eyes burning. "It's okay," I whispered into his curls. "I won't let them take you. Not now. Not ever." His hands clung to me like I was the only solid thing left in his world. His mouth brushed my collarbone, desperate, wordless. And for the first time, I didn't think of the danger. I didn't think of the rules. I thought only of him. That night, we didn't pretend anymore. Eli didn't stay on the edge of the bed, he slipped under the blanket beside me, silent but sure. The storm outside had long passed, but the storm between us was just beginning. His fingers traced my hand in the dark, memorizing every line, every scar. His breath warmed my neck. And then, in a voice so quiet I almost thought I dreamed it, he whispered. "Stay." Just one word. His second. His voice cracked, rough and uncertain, but it was enough to shatter me. I turned, meeting his eyes in the glow of the dying fire. "I will," I promised. "For as long as you want me." He leaned in, hesitant, trembling, and pressed his lips to mine again. This time slower. Softer. A vow instead of a plea. But even as our hearts beat together, I knew we couldn't stay hidden forever. His world would come again, louder, angrier, hungrier to drag him back. And mine? My world was never meant to hold him. Yet as he lay against me, his breath steady at last, I realized something dangerous. I didn't care. If loving him meant burning down everything else, then so be it. Because nothing had ever felt more like home than this boy, this forbidden boy, under my blanket, in my arms, whispering a word that changed everything. Morning came softer than I expected. The sun cut through the curtains, laying gold across the wooden floor. For once, there was no storm, no knocking, no sound but the quiet rhythm of his breath beside me. Eli stirred, blinking against the light. His curls were wild, his eyes red from a night of tears, but there was something new there too, something fragile, something brave. He looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw no fear in him. Only choice. Stay, he whispered again, firmer this time. His voice cracked, but it carried more weight than any sermon, any law. My chest tightened. I brushed my thumb across his knuckles, steadying us both. I'll stay, I promised. Not just for a night. Not just until the world stopped knocking. But for as long as he wanted me, whatever that meant, wherever it led. Outside, the forest stood silent, holding its breath. Inside, the cabin was no longer just mine. It was ours. Maybe the world would come for him tomorrow. Maybe they would drag him back to silence, to rules, to chains. But today, he had chosen. Today, under the same blanket that had once been a barrier, we lay side by side, no longer strangers, no longer silent. And in that fragile morning light, love felt louder than fear. A storm. A knock. And a boy who carried silence heavier than thunder. In that cabin, I thought I'd given him shelter, but instead, he gave me something I never knew I needed, a love worth risking everything for. His voice was rare, his touch forbidden, his presence dangerous, yet unforgettable. Would you have let him in? Or turned him away? If this story stirred something inside you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes, the most forbidden stories are the ones we crave most.